This week on your Old School RuneScape update, Araxxor comes to Old School and we discuss what makes a Slayer boss and look at fight mechanics. Also, new drops including the Noxious Halberd, Amulet of Rancor, and Aranea boots. Are these boots Araxxor's hot drop? And membership prices go up. This is the Old School RuneScape update, episode 43, recorded Saturday, August 31st, 2024. You pay, you play. Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of the Old School RuneScape update. This week is Araxxor week in-game, and you know there has been a long-standing thing that we tend to surprise you podcast listeners with, is that Sirion and myself are, decidedly mid-level when it comes to these sorts of things. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
So we thought let's bring somebody in with a little bit more Slayer prowess. So joining us back again on the podcast is Skater Dan Man from Clan Quest. Welcome aboard.
Hello, thanks for having me again. It's cool to be here.
Yeah,
it's always fun to be on the podcast and get to share some of my own experiences and thoughts about stuff.
Yeah, good to have you, Dan. It has been a long time RuneScape player. Presently holds numerous untrimmed Slayer capes, if I remember correctly. That's the one that it is, right?
Yeah. It's the one, only the one in Old School, but obviously I also got it in RS3 back in the day.
Yeah. So that counts. And I think you got it in the past league too, didn't you? If I remember correctly.
Oh yes, that's true. Actually, I actually got it technically every year. I got one for the last 3 years because I got it on my main, and then I got it in league, or I think I got it in leagues, and then on my main, and then I got it in leagues again. So I obviously don't get to keep the leagues ones, but it's so cool
obviously
to have
not. but you're quite the friend of Slayer then, so that's why we thought, let's see what Dan has to say this week on the podcast, and then after that, of course, we'll be talking about the membership price increases. But if you do want to follow along, full show notes can be found over at update.show. All right, so let's just dive in. Araxxor, Slayer boss, level 92 Slayer required. To start off, what, in your view, makes a Slayer boss compared to a regular boss? Because this was something interesting that I first discovered coming to Old School. What in your view is the difference between a Slayer boss and a non-Slayer boss?
That's a good question, because I guess I started thinking about what are the other bosses and how do they compare. Like, other bosses would be like some bosses that are unlocked after quests, like Vorkath and DT2s, or some bosses that are like classic bosses like God Wars dungeon bosses. Some are associated with raids. But I guess maybe Slayer bosses is just these are tend to be just bosses that are locked behind getting a Slayer task, and as is often been traditionally the case with Slayer, Slayer tends to be the place where you get some of the best in slot items. And so, yeah, it's just another place for some of the cool new best or niche items to get, and it just comes with a Slayer requirement, and tends to be a little bit harder to do because of the fact that you need to get a Slayer task to be able to do them.
Yeah,
I don't think there's really any Slayer bosses that you can do off task.
It's really interesting because if you sort of think back, like a lot of the back in the day, things like the whip and some other iconic items came from Slayer tasks and doing them.
Right.
But like over time, I think things like raids and things like other bosses are sort of, it's hard to give something that is of equal power level from like a basic boss. So I think that's where the Slayer bosses must have come in. Because if you look at all of the Slayer bosses, like they all have some very interesting items, right? Like the Abyssal Bludgeon from the Sire. There's is it the Dust Battle Staff that comes, or Smoke from the Thermonuclear thingamabob?
That would be the Smoke Battle Staff.
Right.
The Dust Battle Staff is a rare drop from
Dust
Superior... Dust Devils, yes, but also Superior Slayer monsters can drop them.
Yeah, exactly. And then, of course, there's like the Hydra that drops a bunch of things, Cerberus drops a bunch of things. Like, all of these make, to me, because other than that, Slayer doesn't really have an output, if you think about it, right? Like, as a skill, it doesn't really output anything. And this gives you reason to hit that high level Slayer level to get access to these bosses with some.
Right.
I mean, at this point, best in slot items, I would argue.
Yeah. So that makes me think, like, talking about all the different stuff that you can get from Slayer and talking about, like, what is the output of it. That makes me think, like, about the history of the skill. Because if you look back to when the skill first came out, and even before there were any Slayer bosses, just Slayer monsters, yeah, there were a bunch of cool a few best in slot items, like all of the metallic boots up to an eventually including dragon boots. And then also you mentioned the whip and a few other things. Like the whip is, compared to every other level 70 weapon, is just blows them out of the water. It's crazy good. And if you also look at just general drops for like lower level, mid-level Slayer monsters, there's a lot of stuff that we kind of take for granted today, but at the time was like, oh my gosh, we get so many herbs from banshees or cave crawlers or whatever. Like, so many things that you would get the herbs from, and then also a lot of things that started dropping lots of runes, like blood velds used to be just like, oh my gosh, these are so good money because blood runes were a scarcity. And now we kind of just take for granted that there's going to be this certain amount of income of blood runes into the game, and getting them from blood velds is not like the reason to do them.
Maybe that's the clincher as to, you know, the way I need to look at Slayer, because I am not a fan of Slayer, but when you put it in this lens of how it was when it, you know, launched in 2005 or 2006, whenever that was. 05, yeah, it was 05. You get a different perspective on what it did for the game. And then, like you said, fast forwarding here to 2024, you have a Slayer boss that is aiming to do kind of the exact same thing with some of the key drops that it puts out. And that's actually really interesting to me in terms of a design perspective on Slayer. Boy,
I mean, that's also, for me, that there's also an interesting like way of looking at sort of the fantasy or the idea behind Slayer, right? Which is that, I mean, it's about slaying. It's about getting good at killing certain monsters, understanding what makes them unique, what are their weaknesses, and all of that, right? Like, if you think about some of the traditional monsters, like gargoyles or desert lizards, where you needed specific items, like that's sort of the theme of the skill. And as the power level has sort of grown, and to make sure that Slayer still stands out, I think it sort of makes sense that, hey, you know, you're now this professional Slayer, please go and kill this literally, you know, hound from hell that has 3 heads.
Right. Because, like, that's a good point, because we were just talking about that, how when it first came out, a lot of these drop tables were like revolutionary, like this is some of the best ways to get lots of loot. And then as the game has progressed, that has sort of become like the standard for what to expect from bosses. And now there's lots of other sources for that sort of stuff. So that no longer stands up as being good enough to hold Slayer up anymore.
Yeah.
So as you mentioned, then we have bosses. So we can talk about all the Slayer bosses that have come out, as you mentioned earlier, throughout old school, like the Kraken and the Abyssal Sire and the Thermonuclear Smoke Devil, et cetera, et cetera. And they each came with like their own unique thing.
Yeah.
But up until now, because we were also comparing them to raids and stuff, whenever the raids have come out, these aren't made to be like end game multiplayer group content. And with these ultra rare, literally best in slot items, Cox had the T-Bow, Theater of Blood had the Scythe, and TOA has the Shadow. And these are like 1.5 to 2 billion gold each. Like, these are the most sought after items in the game. And Slayer is, I mean, I shouldn't, or any other boss that is just a standalone boss, even if it's a Slayer boss, I don't think should be on that level. But they've all sort of had their niches, right? Well, I guess technically Thermonuclear Smoke Devil for a while there, the amulet. What was it? The occult necklace was a
we
tyrant.
talked about that last time you were on the show.
Yes, we talked about that last time about how that happened. I actually was curious. After that came out, did you guys feel that the change like made Mage feel worse or better? Or what were your impressions of
better?
That? Yeah,
better at the mid level, I think.
Yeah. I use it. I don't know. I feel I only use it now when the elemental weakness is like in my favor. Other than that, I don't touch it as much. That being said, I'm like end of mid level, early like high level. So I've started to be able to access some of the other items, and it's been great that it's not just the occult necklace, but the fact that now even like getting the Eladin sword or like upgrading my gear, that is still a considerable upgrade. So it's I don't know if I still like it from a personal perspective, but I think from a game health perspective, it's better right now.
Did you ever get a chance? Did you ever get a chance to try out the Amulet of the Damned with your rims and see if that?
No, I haven't. I haven't.
Because I remember I mentioned that, and it's just like
that was a good revelation
for people of your level to like play around with that as an alternative to the occult and see if it feels good.
But yeah, coming back to Slayer, I think the fact that these Slayer monsters exist, right, and these Slayer bosses exist. I mean, maybe a controversial statement, but I think Slayer in old school is in a better state than it is in RS3, because I think, they have actually managed to make the skill grow alongside the complexity of combat encounters in a way better way. And, there's a reason to do Slayer. It is, especially if you think about it from an Iron Man perspective, right? There is some really juicy stuff behind these bosses. So,
and you're just see, maybe this is the talk I needed, because I hate the damn skill, and this is actually making a compelling design angle behind it. That's actually quite elegant. God damn it.
I don't know if it will fix this, if it will make me like the skill, but in a sense, to me, it makes the skill feel less like a weird thing that you just do alongside normal combat.
Right, and that, aside from needing to change gear in RS3, was always what put me off it, and just the slowness of it in old school up to this point had been my main concern. But let's get into Araxxor itself, and I'm not able to kill the creature, but I did look into the mechanics behind it and watch some videos on it. And I guess the question I have that follows from this, is it generally the blueprint that Slayer bosses be a little bit more on the simpler side in terms of their mechanics? Because that's what I got from what I watched, is that this isn't going to be a walk in the park, but it's not going to be the most complex thing you've ever done in terms of the mechanics and managing those.
So that's an interesting question, because it makes me think of, because you're talking about Slayer bosses in general, and that makes me think of like the evolution of Slayer bosses, and in general, like higher end PVM content in old school. Again, if we look back to some of the first Slayer bosses, Thermonuclear Smoke Devil, or I think Kraken might have been like the first one.
I think it was one of the earlier ones.
Yeah, like Kraken. The only thing that's interesting about Kraken it was the only place where it was actually a good idea to use magic over anything else. You kind of just got like shoehorned into use magic on this because we're gonna make it so everything else sucks. So like that was the interesting thing, but there wasn't really a lot of mechanic. There was like some play steps you had to do, like you had to hit all the tentacles first, but there wasn't really any mechanics. Thermonuclear Smoke Devil also had some kind of interesting stuff, but eventually people just sort of figured out how to cheese it. And it's still a relatively easy boss for being so high level. But if you look at Hydra, Alchemical Hydra is not easy.
Okay.
Although I will say that with any Slayer boss, maybe there is a design approach where, because people are going to be killing this on task necessarily, you want it to be something where you figure out the boss mechanics, and then once you've adjusted to them, you can do them consistently, because you have to do it for like 100 kills. But then again, I suppose that's probably also true for like some stuff like DT2 bosses and whatever. But I've not really done a lot of those. I've done some raids and stuff, and some of the like end game raid bosses are not easy. But they're certainly harder than some of the Slayer bosses. Like I said, Hydra is not easy.
I mean, I got my behind completely whooped when I tried the Abyssal Sire during League, so you know.
Oh yeah, that's fair. Like Sire is, I don't know. I think they all sort of have a learning curve to them. You know, what was the thing that was giving you trouble on Sire?
The last phase.
Okay, yeah. Where you're dancing around avoiding the little miasma pools.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Well, I mean, there's some of that here in this boss fight as well. Like, there's the venom pools and stuff. You have to avoid those, and then if you hit the enrage phase, whenever it's shooting the 3 at a time every attack, you have to literally like time it so you're dancing around. It probably is even set up in a way I don't know. Let me check actually. What is Araxxor's attack speed? It's probably standard.
I believe that when I read
it's a 6 tick attack speed.
From what I could tell,
the reason that's relevant is because actually, you know, it probably attacks at 4 tick when it's enraged. Yeah, never mind. It's 4 tick attack speed when it's enraged. That means that the attack speed of your weapon matters. If you're using a slower weapon, then you're not going to be in sync with its attacks as you're trying to attack it and then avoid its attack. So you need to use a 4 tick weapon, or you're going to want to anyway. On the enrage phase.
Yeah. I also saw that like some of the attacks from the the smallest spider spawns, they're like always off cycle from the attack from Araxxor, so you can play a flick. I thought I read something.
Oh yeah, that's interesting.
So it's interesting how the boss has sort of all of these like small design considerations that if you come in there for the first time, you're probably not gonna worry too much about them. But once you start optimizing them, there's a lot of like room for optimization, which is great. Like I love video games that sort of optimize for like having there be speedrun tactics or just in general like interesting tactics that allow you to, you know, express your skill.
That's kind of like a general theme, I think, in a lot of old school is that there's a very low barrier to entry to combat, but there's a very high skill ceiling. And then there's some in like the mid to high levels, there's some bosses and stuff that require some basic mechanics. But once you get to know the boss more, you can start to like exploit those even further and you realize after doing X kills, like so many hundreds of kills, oh wait, there's this thing that you could technically do on this boss that nobody's talking about. I figured out some cool strategies at Grotesque Guardians, which is another Slayer boss we haven't talked about yet. That some cool stuff because I've done hundreds of kills there.
And see, I think that's the interesting thing about this is that at the core of it, we're also seeing a thing in terms of how they put the eggs in, that you choose which ones you're going to open up on first, if you're going to open up on any of them, to in effect have an impact on how simpler the fight can become in that regard. And
hold on, so because maybe I'm missing something, or maybe you have caught onto a mechanic that I haven't recognized yet, because like I said, I have not gotten to fight the boss yet. Isn't it that the enrage phase is determined by whatever random generation of eggs spawn at the beginning of the fight? Or does that change depending on like the cycle that it's currently on?
So from what I understand, the most southeastern egg will hatch first. And then it will go like in a pattern. But what you can do is you can kill the eggs yourself, so you can sort of influence it.
Oh, okay.
So by killing the eggs, you take longer, but you change the mechanics in doing so.
Okay, so for example, if you're like the enrage phase with the venom, it just seems like so intensive that I don't want to have to worry about that. It's going to be so hard for me because I'm still learning. That if I see that that's the egg, I think it's the mirror egg. then I'm going to destroy that egg if that's the one, so that a different one will generate the enraged phase.
Exactly.
That's interesting. Yeah, I didn't know about that mechanic, so I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, and it's that same sort of choice thing that leads into that, because when you also look at the special attacks that the spider is going to do, that's of course governed by which egg has hatched. So green, of course, is the acid missile, which does the 3x3 effect and lands venom damage. The white one is the mirrorback spider that spawns, and that one is where Araxxor launches the poison around the player and leaves acid pool behind. And then the red one, and I think the red one's maybe the most interesting one, is that it's a single target that hits you, but when you walk around, you drop acid behind you for 6 ticks. So you have to be very careful with that one, because you could, in effect, walk around in such a pattern that you limit yourself to where you can move in the boss arena.
Yeah, that's very reminiscent of, and I think this was probably intentional, because Araxxor is located in Mauritania and has connections to the Theater of Blood, lore-wise, that mechanic in particular is reminiscent of one of the bosses in Theater of Blood, who, if you are not careful throughout the boss fight, like it also creates acid pools around the fight as you go. And if you're not careful and you don't kill it quickly enough, you could eventually lock yourself out of having any way to have good positioning in the fight.
Yeah.
If you're not very careful about where those acid pools get put. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
And I think that there's other similarities between interesting connections between Araxxor and Theater of Blood stuff.
And that, that I think just adds a whole new spin in terms of movement. And I've made it clear numerous times before on the podcast that movement is the bane of my existence when it comes to combat in all incarnations of RS, old school and RS3. So I think having a choice maybe helps, but it might be a hindrance too.
Having a choice between which mechanic you want to deal with, sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Being able to start with.
Did you guys also have a chance to look and see the strats that were being used with the red spider?
I know that you can. It chases you, and when it stops next to you, it'll explode after a little while, just like the little Barney's Lizardman Shaman. So it'll explode, but I understand that you can actually lure it under the boss, and then if you get out of the way, it'll still explode, and the boss will take the damage, and you don't.
Exactly.
Pretty cool mechanic.
I like that.
It makes me. I wish that there was a similar mechanic with the RTO and the bear bosses in the wilderness. It's like, he makes bear traps. Can I lure him into the bear traps, please? But no, the bear traps only catch you. Although, to be fair, he makes an awful lot of them, so it would be kind of trivially easy to lure him onto them.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like the mirrorback spider is, just a reaction time test, and that you need to make sure that you switch to it and kill it as soon as it arrives, or else Araxxor will wind up, reflecting and killing yourself with that. So,
and I don't remember if I saw this somewhere, if I was just theorizing myself. I wonder what happens if you vengeance yourself, and then I guess you hit the boss, and then it recoils back to you, and then that recoils back to the boss because of vengeance. If there's some interesting tactic there, or if it's just, I don't know.
Maybe. I don't know. That would definitely be something somebody would have to dive in and check on that. And then, I feel like the green spider of everything is perhaps most, conventional in terms of what it does. With this one, it's just an attack that scatters acid pools around it when it dies. And the interesting thing, I think, with this one in particular, in fact, all of these spiders, is that if you use ranged, and this is actually mentioned in terms of the information that JX put out this week, if you use ranged and heavy ammunition, so bolts, you will hit your max hit on these spiders.
Yeah, and I believe you also max hit if you use a crush weapon.
Oh yeah, right. So crush weapon makes sense.
So I think it's like either using ranged or melee both have viable strategies. I don't know if there's a good magic strategy, but yeah, if you use a crush weapon and you stay in melee, then you don't need to pray because it only uses melee. And I think if you're at range, it only uses magic. But if you're using range, you probably have high magic defense, so you might not need to pray magic either. So yeah, I feel like they're probably both have viable strategies.
I think, and you know what I think I'm seeing with this in terms of just looking at this, it's interesting to see a fresh take on Araxxor, because flipping the page back to my RS3 side, Araxxor has been trivialized in the last number of years by a lot of things in that game. So it's interesting to see what an Araxxor fight looks like in 2024 in any version of RuneScape that's not, just a trivial cakewalk. So I did enjoy seeing that aspect of it this week as well.
Yeah, I'm a little curious, as someone who never fought Araxxor in RS3, how similar are the mechanics? Is there anything that's similar? Or because I think that I heard that there were mirror spiders in the RS3 biggest version in some way too.
Yeah, the biggest similarity is the mirror back spider, honestly. There's different kinds of spiders that, you can summon and will do various things to you in terms of blowing up on yourself, things that will, in effect, one hit KO you if you don't handle them. But there's also
and you also have some control over which ones are there by being able to
that's based on the pathing that you choose, and based on the day of the week, only certain paths are open. And and as you progress down and you do multiple Araxxor kills per day, the enrage of Araxxor increases, so the boss becomes more and more difficult.
So it becomes this weird thing where, is it a Slayer boss, or
no?
It's
just a boss, any boss, like a regular boss that you can just go and kill.
But it's interesting that it's like you want to kill this on certain days of the week if you want certain arrangements, but then if you kill it too much on one day, it gets harder.
Yeah, and to be fair, the difficulty aspect has kind of waned a bit in recent years due to necromancy and just the huge amount of power creep that the game has seen. Right. But overall, when it comes to it, the main thing people do Araxxor for on RS3 is the rewards. Whereas here, I think you're going to have a situation where, yes, you can go and you can do the Araxxor Slayer boss and hope for good rewards, but I also think along the way, you're probably still fighting a novel Slayer boss that's going to, pose a bit of a challenge to you if you're on the lower end of the high-level spectrum, I'll say.
You mentioned briefly like the rewards and from the boss in RS3. What are the rewards there? Is it anything similar to we have, or is this just completely new landscape for rewards?
It's the tier 90. It's the tier 90 weapons for each style.
Okay.
Yeah, the tier 90 two-handed weapons, which have their own unique use in that they go into
if
invention.
RS3 ever gets anything like that, it'll certainly be like a raid report or something like that.
Yeah. But overall, in terms of mechanics and fight and whatnot, before we get too far down the track, I know we're kind of touching on rewards there. Is there anything else mechanic wise in the fight instance that either of you would like to bring up before we move along?
I'm not sure. Like I think that if I had an opportunity to fight the boss, I would have picked up on some of those little interesting things that you can do that not a lot of people are talking about, like how I figured out, as I was mentioning in Grotesque Guardians, I figured out there's a way to predict whether he's going to use ranged or magic in the last phase if you do something kind of like you do against demonic gorillas. Like little things like that are unobvious mechanics. I saw someone did do a thing where I think that whenever you're fighting in melee, it'll only use melee attacks, and it'll use magic if you move away. So you basically, if you want to be fighting in melee, you want to stay next to it. You don't want to be flinching, going in and out.
Exactly.
But one thing you can do is you can walk under it. And and I think it probably tries to move back so that you can't just camp under it like most bosses will. But someone did an interesting thing where one of the special attacks that you were talking about, where you leave a trail of venom, is like, I don't need to start running around the room and start taking mage attacks and switch my prayer and worry about that. I'll just walk under it for a little while and then come back out.
Okay. Yeah. And I guess that's something we didn't talk about, is the enrage mechanic once it hits 25% health. And I think the interesting thing about this is that once you do get to that enrage bit, its defense level increases by 35. So so you're going to be,
I think I heard about, doesn't it gain different bonuses depending on this enrage or something like that? Maybe I'm wrong, but I thought I remembered hearing that.
I don't know if I saw anything on that, Siren. Does that ring a bell to you?
Okay. I'm looking at the wiki right now. It looks like what you said was right.
Okay, fair enough.
Unless it's still just early days and people are still trying to figure out exactly everything that goes on with all the mechanics.
Yeah. Apparently, an interesting thing is that you can reduce the defense with the Elder Maul spec. Or
I mean, that's just what the Elder Maul spec does.
Yeah. So,
but it would be especially helpful there because it's weak to crush and everything.
Yeah.
There might be, again, with the Elder Maul, there might be some interesting, like, stand-under mechanics to, like, just cheese it a little bit. Probably would be slower kills, but, like, longer trips or something like that.
Yeah, and I feel like that's also just going to be the biggest thing, is just that increase in the increase in attack speed that it has in Enrage. So.
Oh, yeah, like I said, that actually matters a lot for some of the mechanics that it has, especially like the one where it shoots the acid pools every time it attacks. You need to move every time it attacks, but you need to be able to attack yourself. So if you're using a Fang, which is a great weapon, that's a 5-tick weapon. So if you're trying to dodge the pools, you're not going to be able to attack every time you dodge. And so, like,
so maybe Fang not the best thing to be running at.
Right, exactly. Notwithstanding the fact that it's not a crush weapon, and so it's probably not going to be ideal anyway, because it only gets its big bonuses against stab, and that's the spider's biggest defense. But
yeah,
any other weapon, like even the halberd, which is the halberd, this has been a theme with a lot of bosses, where the thing that you get from the boss helps you be better against that boss. That is absolutely not the case here, at least.
No, because it's a noxious halberd, which doesn't have a crush attack on it. Mm-hmm. So, on that,
it is a good time to segue into.
Yeah, let's move to the rewards on that. So, noxious halberd, level 80 attack based weapon. I feel like this is probably something that definitely had to come to the game with Araxxor, but like you said, this is also going to be another 5-tick weapon in addition to not having that crush style associated with it. And just
is this meant to be like sit within like the crystal halberd and the scythe?
What do you mean sit within it?
Like in between terms of sitting between them?
In terms of progression.
Let's see. So crystal halberd is not like a top tier weapon. It would be more like something between Blade of Saeldor and Scythe.
Oh my god! Okay.
Well,
I'm so far off being able to afford a blade. So, oh my god.
Well, so like the blade, as far as the level 80 weapons go, because you've got the blade, which is good for slash. You've got the rapier, which is good for stab, and then you've got the Inquisitor's mace, which is good for crush. Otherwise, they all have, I think, exact same stats, same attack speed, and everything. It's just different styles. Mm-hmm. The Inquisitor's mace, as people usually didn't go for that. Well, honestly, all of them are really expensive, but the Inquisitor's mace is really expensive just because of its rarity. People always went for the rapier because I think that was the cheapest option, because I think most people, there were a lot more coming to the game through Theater of Blood.
Right.
But then that sort of got power crept by the Fang. I don't even know if people really use the rapier anymore.
Oh, no, no,
So
no,
like,
no. The rapier is still very much worth it at some bosses because
you know
I
what? That
forgot what, because there's a weird
uh,
interaction between with the bosses,
right. That makes sense
with the
because
defense base.
right, because I did notice that there are some cases in which I will even use a whip over a fang because
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember
Like
what it was.
I was looking at the Moons of Peril earlier today, to upgrade
Oh,
my gear, and it was like you should use an abyssal dagger over a fang. I'm
yeah.
like,
Yeah.
okay.
So I just remembered why the Fang isn't always best in slot, even though it's an extremely good weapon. It's because a lot of its strength comes from its double accuracy roll. So it's
Yeah,
especially good against things with high defense. But against
exactly.
like Slayer and stuff, anything with like that doesn't have a certain amount of defense, you're
Yeah,
just way better using something like even a whip or a rapier. So they're still really good weapons.
exactly.
Um, but in terms of the halberd, I ran some numbers on it. Let me see here. So I was comparing it to the Blade of Saildor because that was sort of what they were saying. It's a level 80 weapon. It's in that slash category, so it's around there. It's a little bit worse DPS when you include like some not like max strength, but high strength strength bonus armor and stuff. So like bandos, uh, Berserker Ring and all that stuff. So the lower attack speed does make the blade better, I think, in general. But there's some
Mhm.
interesting niches with the halberd that I've seen people talking about. So like initially when I heard about it, I was just like, okay, so it sounds like it's going to be close to the Blade of Saildor, but the Blade of Saildor is going to be better because of the attack speed and the extra that you get off of all your other strength equipment. So is the halberd actually going to have anything useful? The only thing it has going for it is that reach. But
Yeah.
how often does that matter? But surprisingly, there's actually a good number of bosses in the game where like they won't move and they have different mechanics whether you're in melee range or not. And so in
Mm,
those cases, like the one of the interesting ones that I've seen is the in Theater of Blood, like I was saying, that there's some connections between this and Theater of Blood. If you use the Noxious Halberd in Theater of Blood against the final boss has a mechanic where if you are in melee range with it during one of its phases, she'll like bonk you. So like people who are really good at that have to do this special mechanic where they're like dancing back and forth on just the right tick, where they're next to it when she's not attacking, but when she does use attack, they're not next to it. And it's like this juggling
Oh
act, which is
God.
not it it it's difficult to
I'm just
master. I
trying
did
to
it a little
imagine
bit
how that
in
looks in my head
Trailblazer
right
League.
now.
Oh yeah. You should watch if you're interested in that. You should check out some guides when people were doing it in Trailblazer League, the first one, because people had 2 tick attack speed and you're attacking like with a whip or whatever, but you're going in and out literally every tick, and you have to time everything perfectly. But you're also trying to dodge stuff. It's crazy the strategies people have figured out. But with if you have the Noxious Halberd, you can basically just stand 1 tile away and don't have to worry about that. Then you can still attack with melee. It's really chill. And then on top of that, if you manage to get the boots, which we haven't talked about yet, the boots give you have this interesting side effect on top of their other stats and stuff, where every 10 seconds they'll negate any web effect that is currently on you. You might think that's extremely niche. How many web effects are there in the game? Not a lot, but Verzik has a web thing. So if you want to be kind of chill, it's not like her webs are that easy to avoid, not are that hard to avoid. But if you kind of just want to like have that extra safety net, they're fine. And the boots are also probably just good in raids in general.
Okay.
the halberd special effect also gives it a little bit of a niche, right? Because I think.
Oh yeah, where if the more I think it's if you're poisoned or venomed,
Yeah.
then you can activate the special to make it so your next attack has the minimum hit increased by the amount of poison damage you would have taken.
Yeah.
I don't know if it also gives you any
And
window
heals
of
you, right? Or doesn't
immunity,
it?
but I don't know if it heals. Well, it does remove the poison condition,
Yeah, there you go.
but I
Okay.
don't know if it gives you any like window of immunity, like for a minute or 30 seconds or anything like that. It might just remove it, in which case it's like, okay, you still probably want to bring anti-poisons wherever you're using this because you're just going to get poisoned again.
Yeah, and it also has the weapon itself has the chance to inflict venom on your target, which, there's other things that do that in game. But
that is the thing that I think really brings it ahead, potentially, of the Blade of Saeldor or other things that are similar to it, because, like, it's easy to underestimate the value of venom or poison. So, like, the Tentacle Whip, for example, compared to the Abyssal Whip. The Tentacle Whip has a little bit higher strength, so you get about 1 more max hit, but it also has the chance to inflict 4 poison, which doesn't sound like a lot, and a lot of time it isn't. But if you're fighting anything where you're attacking it for more than 17, 18 I think it's 18 seconds or something like that, which is how often the poison procs. If you're fighting anything where a fight takes more than that amount of time, you're going to get a poison proc basically every kill, which means you're going to deal like 4 more damage than you normally would have. That's basically like a max hit on top of everything else.
And so, that's especially worthwhile, I think, on monsters that are severely accuracy limited. Like if you hit a lot, if you splash a lot, basically.
Right.
Just rely on the poison or venom. Right.
Anything with high hit points, venom has always been good at. But also, like you said, if you can inflict venom early, then it's just going to keep ticking. It doesn't care about defense.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So overall, Noxious Halberd, I feel like it's not gonna, I don't think it's gonna shock the world, but it's absolutely not like something that people are gonna hate.
Or it's like, so I don't have a Blade of Saeldor either, but if I'm looking for a high level slash weapon, I think there's a good chance I'll be leaning more towards trying to get one of these halberds instead, depending on where the price stabilizes at. Because it seems actually surprisingly good.
All right. What about the Amulet of Rancor? Level 90 HP to wear.
Yeah.
86 crafting to craft.
Rhythm.
So we were talking about best, not dropping best in slot things, right?
It is tradable though. So yeah, yeah. So this is obviously the exception, and this is the case for this. So I think that the goal here was, so obviously we've had the Xenolite jewelry in the game for a while. The Amulet of Torture being the best for the melee.
Yeah.
And it's been the best up until this was released. But the problem that I think a lot of high-level players found was that even if you have one of these, there's not a lot of situations where you want to use it, just because in a lot of the high-level bossing and stuff where you'd think you want to have the best in the slot, the better item to use is probably the Blood Fury, because if you're doing hard content, you want to be able to heal yourself passively as you're going.
Right.
So, the question is that the Amulet of Torture competed with the Blood Fury, and now this Noxious Amulet also competes with the Blood Fury.
But this is just one step beyond in terms of stats, too. So it's just a little bit more carrot to see if maybe people want to move beyond that Blood Fury
I think
space.
It has, I want to say 10 or 15 higher attack bonuses in all the melee attack styles. And then it has +2 strength bonus.
Yeah,
but it also has
10.
some relatively small penalties to magic and range, which are probably not going to matter because you're probably not trying to.
No, because you're not wearing this if you're doing magic
anyway.
Arranged. I don't think.
Right. You're not trying to do any hybrid build with this. If you're hybriding, you're still using Blood Fury anyway, or you're switching for Occult, whatever. So, I think the biggest question is, are those attack bonuses, which are not nothing, but they are relatively small, and the +2 strength enough to really make people feel like it's worth using that over the Blood Fury? Because over the Blood Fury, it's still only 2 more. I think it's still only 2 more strength over the Blood Fury, which is the same as the.
It's 4 more strength over the Blood Fury. Just looking at it right now.
Is it
12 versus 8?
Oh, okay. So I was thinking it's 2 more over the Torture. So it does give you a max hit over the Blood Fury, assuming you're like a max character. There's about every 4 strength bonuses equates to an extra max hit at that level.
How do we feel about them having settled on the 86 crafting requirement to make this?
I remember granted, that was kind of a contentious point.
Yeah, that's why I asked.
Yeah. I don't know, because like obviously I think the reason it was contentious is because Zenyte jewelry, if I'm just gonna look at my crafting real quick to make sure I don't say this wrong, was they required 98 for the Zenyte amulet. So it's like, well, the only way to do better than that is 99.
Which I don't think is something you want on a boss.
Right. Clearly, when they released the Zenyte jewelry, like, this is just going to be best in slot amulet jewelry forever.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know. I guess the fact that it comes also with the 90 hit points requirement kind of balances out,
I feel like that's going to be the main factors, that you have to be relatively high level to wear it, and then you make that choice between Rancor and
right.
Blood Fury. So
and for like the Iron Men, like, because honestly the crafting requirement really is mostly only relevant for Iron Men because everyone else for the most part is going to buy it, or if they can't buy it, if they get the drop, they'll sell it to buy it? Because can't you sell the thing that you combine
Nope. You can't sell the Araxxor Fang. Nope.
Oh, okay. So if you get it, you kind of just like, well, I have to get the level now, or this is just going to sit in my bank.
Yeah.
I
mean, I guess that's a nice reward for getting 86 crafting.
Is not nothing. Yeah, so. Exactly. 86 is not nothing, but it's like I said, if you're an Iron Man, if you want to actually use it, you actually need 98. So. And it's basically 96 in order to have this drop be valuable for you. Otherwise, it's just going to rot in your bank for a main account. So, I don't know. I think it's probably fine.
Yeah. And then I think that's pretty much that was everything for the rewards here.
Speaking, though, about like new best in slot, like I'm generally someone who's kind of just like really hesitant about power creep. But I think maybe in this case, because the Torture itself was struggling to compete with the Blood Fury, that maybe it's kind of okay. But at the same time, I'm not even sure that this is still really enough. The Blood Fury is just really good.
Yeah, it's interesting that didn't get a pass in Project Rebalance.
The Amulet of Rancor doesn't just increase your strength bonus, it also has a plus 10 attack bonus for all styles.
So it does, right, it does give you an accuracy bonus as well, which there are probably situations where that's better. And I think that the case where if you're a high-level PVMer and you're wanting to use Rancor or even previously Torture over a Blood Fury, you're only going to use that in situations where you feel like you've mastered the boss to the point where you're no longer really taking damage.
Yes.
Exactly. For me, I mentioned Hydra a while ago. So Hydra, because you only get it for a Slayer task, I only get to kill that boss every once in a while. Whenever I get one of those tasks, I'll put on my Blood Fury for the first so many kills so I can get reaccustomed to the mechanics. But then it's like there's no point bringing it because I'm just wasting charges because I'm not taking damage because I know how to do the boss without taking damage. So at that point, then I switch over to something like the Torture, or I guess now it'll be the Rancor if I am able to get one.
Yeah. There's also the Venom Sacs, which are used in creating extended anti-venom potions, which I guess is just, that's a good thing. There's not too much to say on those. So.
Yeah, seems whatever. Don't have a strong opinion about either way. Like, I never use anti-venoms anyway, but I guess you kind of need them. Doesn't Araxxor venom you?
Yep.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Makes sense for the boss.
It makes sense. Yeah, it helps because I guess anti-venom was very niche in any of its use cases previously, because very few things venom. So this kind of makes it so we've added this new thing where venom is a relevant thing. Let's actually make a thing that helps you counter it by extending these potions, which seems fine.
All right. So that's the boots, the amulet, and of course,
can't you also consume the venom sac there to remove poison or something like that?
Yep.
Okay.
You take damage.
You take damage, but it removes it. Removes the condition.
Well, yeah, you're putting a venom sac, a raw venom sac from a spider inside you. Of course, that's going to happen.
I think that's an interesting design choice. But does it give you immunity for a period of time?
Yes.
Or does it just remove it?
Yeah, they provide immunity to poison for 11.7 minutes and venom for 18 seconds at the cost of dealing
that's fine.
Venom damage to the player.
And don't the extended anti-venoms last like 12 minutes or something like that?
Extended anti-venom lasts 17 minutes for poison and 6 minutes for venom.
Did you just say that the venom sacs, though, if you just consume those, they deal damage to you, but then you're immune for like 11 minutes?
That's for poison. Poison, 11 minutes.
Oh, okay.
And venom for 18 seconds.
Oh, okay. So it's kind of like if you're getting these on task, you can just sort of use them in a pinch, but you're probably bringing anti-venoms anyway. Maybe just hold on.
Yeah. I mean, hey, if you're at the spider, chomp down on some venom sacs. It'll be a good day.
Yeah. I feel like an 18-second immunity is just like, well, that's good for maybe this kill.
All right.
But I think you also can avoid basically all damage there if you know what you're doing. Because I think I heard people saying that you can basically do extending trips there.
Yeah, that's what I saw as well. People are really sinking their teeth into it and having a good time with it. But is there anything else with Araxxor before we move on to the other topic that folks were wondering about this week? Well,
there's a couple interesting rewards we haven't touched on yet. Okay. One of them is the jar, which it's so I don't know how much you guys know about the history of the jar. My understanding is that the jar drops was originally like an in-joke for Kraken. They added a jar of dirt as this ultra rare, useless item that people would get and be like, I killed the Kraken. What did I get? I got a jar of dirt. Awesome. So it was just this troll drop, and then people realize this is an ultra rare.
And now they lean into it.
Yeah, and so like they added that to basically every Slayer boss. There might even be other bosses. Slayer, I think Next probably has like a jar of something. I don't know. There's a lot of bosses that have these, and eventually, as they started adding more and more of these, they're like, well, people want these to actually have a use, so they made them have a cosmetic use in your player on house.
Achievement gallery,
build a thing. Yeah, and so that's a cool idea. But then because now it's a sign of achievement, the fact that they're tradable seems really weird. It no longer seems to make sense that they should be tradable. And so for this boss, they decided, hey, we're going to make it so this one's not tradable, which makes sense given the current state of jars, but it just feels really weird given that jars have always been tradable. Like imagine you're a player who gets this and you're like, all the other jars I've gotten were tradable. Why is this one not? I don't know.
I mean, I get it. At the same time, I don't think we should let tradition be a showstopper for making something.
Right.
Changing something that makes more sense.
Yeah, and I think as an achievement item, it makes sense as being non-tradable.
Right. Like, I 100% agree that it should be untradable, but I also feel like all jars should be untradable. But at the same time, it's hard to argue that they should just make all jars untradable because someone's got like a max stack of jars or something stupid. So I don't know. It's just it's an interesting place that it's in where it makes sense, but at the same time, it feels weird compared to all the other jars. And then obviously there's the pet, and then you can also get an upgrade that actually makes it a baby pet, which I don't know if that feels like an upgrade or not, but different people have different opinions on that.
It's cute now.
I mean, it depends on how much you value
how much you value pets.
Well, how much you value cuteness in your pet, whether you think that's an upgrade or not, But I mean, it is what it is. I don't think it's a bad decision. It's just interesting that you get these two different variants.
Yeah. What about the Slayer? What about the Slayer helmet add-on? Are you going for that?
I think that my philosophy would be the same as it is for like any Slayer boss, where it's like if I get it, I get it.
Okay, so you're not going to hunt it.
It also looks like the drop rate is not terrible. I think I saw that it was like 1
in 250.
1 in 250. Like that's probably probably a couple Slayer tasks. If you get those Slayer tasks, you're probably going to get it. I did eventually get the heads for the sire, or not the sire. I got the heads for the Hydra. So I have an alchemical Hydra helmet, which is pretty cool. So yeah, it'd be cool to get it. And then the other thing we haven't touched on is not actually from the boss, but it's from the little guys, the boots. We talked a little bit about how they're useful for avoiding certain web effects, which is kind of extremely niche. But it's funny to me that they decided to put these on the little guys because they said we don't want them to just crash into obscurity because people aren't going to want them. But for me, this is the thing that I am most excited about with this boss. These boots.
Why?
Seem extremely
where do you
good
see them useful? I guess that's the question.
For me, so I've been doing raids and stuff. And basically every raid, you need to bring tribrid gear. This means no boot switches. And you're probably going to be... The fact that you don't get defense doesn't matter because you're probably praying against or otherwise avoiding all the damage anyway. Or trying to. So it's like, these just seem so good for any tribrid setup. It's so weird to me that they think people aren't going to want them, which maybe that's true. Maybe other people are seeing something I'm not. But for me, it's like...
You just want a set of boots that aren't going to penalize you for a style, basically.
Well, so I think people look at them compared to the best in slot in each individual style. So, for example, melee. If you look at these next to the best in slot melee, the primordial boots have one higher strength bonus. Am I wrong about that? Let me check.
I don't know the bonus offhand. These are plus 4. They
give plus 5. 4. I'm looking at my boots in my bank right now. So, primordial boots give plus 5. That's one more strength bonus. So that means if you are a max player, that 25% of the time, this will actually give you a max hit. So, depending on your gear setup, and if you're not using divine potions, the difference between using primordial boots and these does nothing for your max hit. The only difference is lower defense. But again, if you're praying against stuff, that doesn't matter. I made the same argument with the Guardian boots and their upgrade the Echo boots. Like, Guardian boots are extremely good, and the Echo boots are also extremely good. The difference in strength is negligible because depending on your gear setup, it literally might not even matter whenever you actually run the numbers on your max hit. So these boots just seem really good to me. I want to get a pair of these, and then I'm going to be using them for doing Chambers of Zarek and Tombs of the Masket. And I've not done much Theater of Blood, but
I wonder if this is going to be the hot take of the podcast. I mean, it could be.
I mean, I'd be interested to hear why people are not excited about these boots. They just seem so good. And the crazy thing to me, on top of all of this, like, it'd be one thing if it's just, okay, you get them from the little guys, and I appreciate the fact that they want to make it so some things are not, like, what is possibly the least desirable item for endgame players from this boss is not going to be something that they get a ton of in the market crashes because we've got pet hunters and whatever, right? Which is another interesting thing, the fact that they made it so pet hunters can just destroy the corpse.
Oh, yeah, that's another feature that came over from RS3 Araxxor.
Yeah. Oh, really? That's interesting. I didn't know it was an RS3 thing.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting because it makes it so that the pet hunters aren't artificially, like, having extra income into the game. If they really just want a pet, then they're not bringing extra items into the game in addition to that. But, like, putting these boots on the little guys outside, on top of that, the other thing that makes it that seems so crazy to me is the fact that there's no defense requirement. Because like I mentioned, for the reasons I explained, in my mind, these look like the best in slot raiding boots.
Well, maybe they are, maybe they're not. And I think at the end of the day, you have you, Dad, have a compelling case as to why you're going to like them. I want to hear from the community on this because I'm not 100% sold with that. I
want to know too. I want to know why people are not excited about these boots.
But I also think
they got buffed. I thought they were exciting in the initial proposal, and then they got buffed.
But I also think that they're interesting because there's no defense requirement alongside them too.
Yeah, so. I mean they give no defense bonus, but like. Look at the other boots. They are now the best in slot for pures because of that.
Oh boy.
Yeah, and I'm just like, okay, like what did they used to use? Probably climbing boots.
That does sound like something else that would be in that case.
So this is 2 strength more than climbing boots. And then also they've got all the other stat bonuses. I also heard people talking about using them in PvP situations because you basically always try Britain. See, they seem really good to me. I don't know.
Okay, well, we'll leave that minutia off for the side. I do want to talk about some numbers before we depart here. And, Sirion, I want to go to you first on this one here in terms of the new price increases. And the interesting bit about this is that the thing I want to say off the top here is, if you go month to month, you're looking at $1.50 increase per month in terms of your membership. If you go for Premier Club, you're going for a little bit less than $2 a month increase because last year's was $6.67 for the Premier 12 month. It's now going up to $8.29 for that. And the thing that I see with this and that I want to just get on the table immediately off the bat here is that these changes and the decision to look at membership prices and increase them is definitely baked into a 6 to 12 month corporate strategy. So this just wasn't immediately decided upon. I don't think to happen. It's something that was probably on the corporate calendar for a long time. And as the post mentions, this ties in with inflation and using that to, of course, fund the developers that make the games. So.
Yeah, I agree. I've been seeing a lot of for some reason price increases are like the one thing that just encourages everybody to complain, and even in our clan Discord it feels like there's a discussion about this, the topic moves to someone else, and then one person is like, and I'm gonna cancel my subscription. And it feels like, I don't know, to me,
if you're going to cancel your subscription, I'm sorry, you're going to not have your grandfathered price anymore. So you're just making it worse for yourself.
Exactly. No, I think that's the whole thing, right? Be outraged, I don't know, but so many subscriptions get more expensive, and we deal with this all the time. My Netflix subscription gets more expensive all the time.
And put it into perspective, how much you get out of Netflix per month compared to RS?
Not as much in my case, though.
I don't watch Netflix, so
some people tend to combine the two in a lot of situations.
Yeah, that's true.
Netflix and skill.
Yeah, exactly. No, but for me, the whole thing is nobody is forcing you to keep the subscription. You can cancel it by all means. But a lot of people, I've been seeing a lot of call outs for people hey, we should all mass cancel our subscription and give Jagex a message. I'm going to tell you right now, as someone who has worked very, very closely adjacent to this industry, that all of these numbers have been calculated. The drop in subscriptions is expected, and they did the maths, and they're going to end up with more money in the end. So by all means, just do it. But they know what's going to happen, and I think if you are trying to go out there and telling everybody they should cancel because of how unfair this is, you're just gaslighting the community. And
fairness is very subjective.
And that's the next thing, right? Fairness is subjective. There's no such thing as a fair price. There's only the price that people are willing to pay for it. And I can assure you that there's a lot of smart people who have been doing a lot of research in trying to figure out what the maximum price is that people can get away with, because that's what's good for a company. And that's how these commercial companies tend to work. They will just charge you the maximum that won't make everybody walk away. So nobody's gonna walk away, because if you can say a lot about competence of Jagex. I think they're pretty competent, but opinions of that are mixed. But at the very least, their monetization department will be competent, because that's required for the continued survival of a company.
There are people whose entire job it is to run the spreadsheets and figure out what the margins are and how far they can move these things on the scale.
But to come back to that whole point of fairness, like a lot of people are saying, oh, it's no longer worth it. And sure, back in the day, RuneScape was like this cheap subscription, like $5 a month, yada yada yada. But and now it's coming up to like.
Look at that compared to what WoW was at the time.
Yes.
Like, RuneScape was the obvious choice. The fact that you're now paying close to what people were paying for WoW 20 years ago. Like, you should be grateful.
Exactly, like that's one thing. And even now, like if you buy like a AAA game, it's like $70. You can pay 5 months of RuneScape membership for it. Now, how many, like I know how much RuneScape I play in 5 months, and it is most than any AAA game I have spent $70 on.
And that's what I meant in terms of value, whether you compare it to Netflix or a AAA game.
Exactly. Right. Now, a lot of people are saying, hey, like World of Warcraft is still only $14 a month. Or 15 or whatever. The thing is, that is heavily monetized, like even worse so than Treasure Hunter. And here on the old school side, we can't even get to complain about that, right?
Right.
We pay this money, and like that's it. We get access to all of it. We don't have to pay extra money to get access to Varlamore. We don't have to pay extra money to get access to leagues.
Right. The reason you're paying extra is you're paying to not have MTX in the game. That's what you're paying for. If it's either this or MTX, pick your poison.
So I
watch you on the RS3 show, Dad. Next time we talk about this, I'm sorry, that's just really funny.
I feel like the only people who are complaining about this must be people who either are the people who make lots of accounts regularly, like they like to play lots of different low-level accounts and weird builds and whatever, like maybe PvPers who are constantly like making low-level pures or whatever, or maybe a good amount of it might even be botters who are just like, I make 100 accounts a day and they all get banned and this is cutting into my profit margins, or something like that, because as we mentioned, you get a grandfathered price. For the vast majority of players who are just like, I am subscribed and I pay once a month and I don't think about it. And then I play RuneScape as much as I want. Like, and they just never unsubscribe. Those players, this doesn't even matter.
Yeah, and to be fair,
doesn't affect them at all.
The people this price increase hits the most are the people who buy the yearly membership.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And I think Fran's in that category because she has like looked for deals on the yearly membership and stuff and tried to get the best deal to like, because not only does she have her main, but she also has 2 Ironmen that she plays at various times. And so she's not constantly subscribed on all of them at the same time. She tries to pick and choose when to be subscribed. So like, I get that, especially if people have multiple accounts and they don't want to be subscribed on all of them all the time. Like, it makes sense that you'd be like, oh shoot, well now every time I want to decide whether I'm subscribing on this account because I'm going to play it for a month or two, it's a bigger decision because I'm paying that much more every month. Like, I have an Iron that I've still never gone member on, but now it's like, okay, well, if I ever do, it's going to be a little bit more upfront. But yeah. I think personally, I'm willing to pay that price, partially because for me, it's only one more account compared to other people who might have a lot, but also the.
I do think that's a big.
I'm paying for not MTX, so I'm happy with it. Yeah.
That I do think, and that's always been a downside of RuneScape. Like in a lot of MMOs, you tend to get like multiple character slots, which allow you. But those tend to have like multiple classes and very different play styles.
Right.
So you want to switch. Whereas, like, I mean, until Iron Man was a thing, maybe you make a pure, right? But that was just not a mainstream thing to do.
Right.
And now it's a little bit different, and that piece of legacy has never really caught up. And I do kind of wish they had some kind of discount, I guess. Like you could buy like a character pack of like 3 memberships and get a little bit of discount.
That's an interesting idea.
As long as they're linked to like the same Jagex account, or I would love to be able to just swap my membership between the different accounts on my.
That would also be interesting.
Not like infinitely, but like maybe like at most every 3 months. But like,
sure.
I think they could create a lot of goodwill with that, and I wonder how much extra money they make by the fact that people have to sort of pay for all of the accounts at the same time, which yeah. So we'll see.
That's interesting because I imagine for a lot of like new players who maybe, because I've been saying lots of stuff online with people who are like, apparently this old school RuneScape thing is really big. I'm a WoW player, but let's try it out. I got a bunch of friends who are saying this is the hotness. So they're trying out RuneScape, and then they're like, what? I only get one character? Well, I get to have this account, and I can have multiple characters on the account, sort of, but I have to pay separately for every one. Like, it makes sense that would be jarring to outsiders who are not used to the way RuneScape and your account has always worked, where it's like
it's an entirely different beast in that regard. And another thing I've also run into this week on the opposite end of that is that there's a lot of people out there who only play RS that don't know that in these other games you get multiple characters for your prices. But I think at the end of the day it just becomes a question of value, right? And there's nothing that says you need to pay for it. If you're on the monthly price, you're going to stay grandfathered in. You probably shouldn't be complaining about this. If you're on the yearly subscription and you feel that you're not getting the value from it, well, then your only option, as hard as this is to say, is to basically consider whether or not you want to continue that subscription, because like it or not, they're just numbers at the end of the day, and a bunch of people complaining on the internet about prices isn't going to change anything.
I that's like, honestly, I could afford like a bunch of subscriptions, but like every now and then I just go over them. I'm like, is this still giving me value? And every now and then you just cut out some of your subscriptions because they're not providing that much. And to be fair, things like streaming services are getting more expensive, games are getting more expensive, and I'm being and that means that more and more of these no longer provide me with value. But it is what it is. That's the industry right now. If that's where it settles, that's where it settles.
I think that's probably a good point to leave this on, because there's other angles you can push too. But as it is, like we mentioned at the top of this segment, old school is you pay, you play. There's no monetization or microtransactions involved in it. That's what you're paying for on the old school side. And the question of value for membership is very much an RS3 thing that lands, that doesn't necessarily need to be talked about as much on the old school side. So, but
I do think it's interesting to think of Syrian touched on this briefly, where he mentioned about how, like, when Iron Man came out, I think that the way a lot of content creators have been, like, they make a new account and they're doing some sort of snowflake where, like, I'm gridlocked, or I'm gonna, like, they figure out some special way they're gonna play the game, and then that gets interesting, and people are like, oh, I want to try that, and then in order to try that, they have to do a whole new subscription, whether that's Iron Man or Ultimate Iron Man or playing a chunk account or whatever. Like, it's kind of like playing a different class.
But at the same time, I mean, this is speculation. At the same time, I think that kind of behavior is one of the reasons that old school has been able to keep otherwise completely free of MTX, because people do make multiple accounts.
I think it's a good thing in the long run. It's just every individual has to make their own decisions about how many accounts they're willing to pay for at a time, or how many they're actually going to be playing to get that value, like you guys were talking about. So, yep, makes sense.
Well,
like
folks,
a good monetization model has like multiple tiers of things that you can spend time on. Like this is always a problem that subscriptions have. Like, some people are willing to spend more money than other people. So you want your subscription price to hit that point where you hit the minimum of most people, but you'd also like to capture that extra little bit of money that the rich people would like to spend.
You gotta catch the whales too, huh?
Exactly. And in RS3, well, we'll not talk about too much about how they do it, but they have their methods. In old school, I think just being able to make multiple accounts has that has a similar vein, and I think that has been enough to keep the whole thing afloat. So
if you're rich enough, you just buy as many accounts as you want. You don't think too much about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and if you want to hear the RS3 value discussion, there was a much longer discussion on monetization and value and membership prices on that show. If you want to hear that side of it too, that exists as well. youtube.com/RSPNB. But I think that brings us to the end of this show for this week. A little bit longer than normal. Thank you, Dan, for joining us here on this episode to talk a little bit about Slayer and Araxxor and combat. And of course, as we mentioned, I think what I want to know most about are the boots. So folks, let us know in the comments and Discord on YouTube.
Are they good? Are they trash? Please.
Yeah, do you agree with Dan, or do you think they just belong in the trash pile? But
it seems like such a crazy notion to me. I think they're so good. Am I wrong? If I am, tell me why. What does that one strength bonus on primordials really matter?
And Sirion, of course, your wonderful discussion about the player agency and perceived fairness. I think that is definitely something that we missed on the RS3 side. So thank you for that. But that brings us to the end. If you do want to subscribe to the podcast, you can do so by visiting update.show/OS. We're on all the major podcast listeners out there: Apple, Google, Spotify. Well, Google's YouTube, youtube.com/@OSRSupdate. And of course, Pocket Cast as well. But just update.show/OS. That's where you go if you want the show delivered automatically to you. But that's it for this edition of the Old School RuneScape Update. We'll see you guys next week for another one. See you then. Take care. Thanks again, Dan.
Yep. Thank you.